Doris, your services are no longer required. We're terminating your employment effective immediately. My boss, Dan Moore, said to me that fateful morning. So I picked up the severance packet, looked Dan Moore dead in the eye, and said the two words that would cost him $5.3 billion. Thank you. What Dan didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I owned something worth more than their entire company. I stood up, tucked the severance under my arm, and walked out without another word. Took the elevator down 47 floors, walked through the lobby one last time, and stepped into the California sunshine. In exactly 48 hours, I was going to use their own greed to destroy everything they'd built. But first, let me tell you how a fired systems architect became the woman who brought down a billion-dollar company. If you believe in second chances, hit the subscribe button and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And if you want to see justice served in the most satisfying way possible, make sure to subscribe, because this story is about to get intense. And he had no idea what was coming. My name is Doris Flinch, I'm 41 years old, and for the past 6 years, I was the chief systems architect at Crystal Valley Technologies. I still am a systems architect. Just not theirs anymore. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, blue-collar town, blue-collar family. My dad was a factory foreman at the GM plant, hands permanently stained with grease, shoulders permanently bent from 30 years of honest work. My mom worked night shifts as a nurse at Columbus General, coming home exhausted at 7 a.m. just as I was getting ready for school. They taught me two things that would save my career: work harder than everyone else and always have a backup plan. But more than that, they taught me what dignity looked like when the world tried to strip it away from you. I'm not the type to make waves. Never have been. I show up early, stay late, and I solve problems that other people can't solve. I don't play office politics. I don't schmooze at company parties. I just build things that work. Maybe it's because I watched my parents pour their hearts into jobs that never poured anything back. But growing up in those factory towns taught me something else, something that would become my secret weapon. The company doesn't love you back. Ever. I learned this watching my dad get laid off after 28 years. Watching him sit at our kitchen table with his head in his hands, wondering how he was going to pay the mortgage. Doesn't matter how many 18-hour days you put in, doesn't matter how many impossible deadlines you meet. When push comes to shove, you're just a line item on a spreadsheet, so you better love yourself enough to protect what's yours. I took those lessons and that pain from Columbus to MIT, then to Silicon Valley, then to a little startup called Crystal Valley back in 2018. 23 employees in a converted warehouse in Palo Alto. The founder, Rebecca Martinez, had this incredible vision for modular business systems, software that could adapt to any company's workflow like digital Lego blocks. Rebecca hired me because I understood something most architects didn't. True modularity isn't about making parts that fit together. It's about making parts that think together. Maybe it's because I grew up watching my parents work in perfect sync. Dad fixing things, Mom healing people. Two different skills, one shared purpose. For 4 years, Rebecca and I built something beautiful. The platform wasn't just software. It was like a living organism that learned from every client, adapted to every business model, and grew smarter with every implementation. We had Fortune 500 companies begging to license our technology. By 2022, we were pulling in $180 million in annual revenue. Rebecca and I had this perfect understanding. She handled the business side, I handled the technical side. She never questioned my architecture decisions, and I never questioned her strategic direction. Complete trust. The kind of partnership my parents had, the kind you don't find in corporate America very often. Then, everything changed. Rebecca got sick, pancreatic cancer. I still remember the day she told me, sitting in her office overlooking the parking lot where we used to eat lunch and dream about changing the world. She fought like hell for 8 months, but by January 2023, she was gone. The woman who built Crystal Valley from nothing, who understood that technology is only as good as the people who create it, was just gone. I cried at her funeral. Not just for losing a boss, but for losing the only person in Silicon Valley who saw me as more than just another engineer. 6 weeks after Rebecca's funeral, the board brought in Dan Moore. Harvard MBA, McKinsey background, all the right buzzwords about scalable growth and market optimization. He took one look at our organic, relationship-driven culture and decided it needed what he called strategic restructuring. I should have seen the writing on the wall when he started calling our modular platform legacy architecture. Legacy, like something Rebecca and I had poured our souls into, was already obsolete. But here's what Dan didn't understand about me. And if you're still watching, hit that subscribe button because this is where my Ohio factory town upbringing saved my entire career. 2 years earlier, when Crystal Valley was cutting budgets and I was working 18-hour days to save their platform, I had made a decision that would change everything. I remembered what my dad told me when the GM plant started downsizing, his voice breaking as he said, "Doris, always have something they can't take away from you." So I did. Let me ask you this, and drop your answer in the comments. Have you ever worked somewhere that felt like family, only to watch new management destroy it? Because that's exactly what I was watching happen to everything Rebecca and I had built with our own hands, our own hearts. And Dan Moore had no idea what was coming for him. Dan's first 100 days as CEO were like watching a slow-motion car crash, and I was trapped in the passenger seat, powerless to stop it. He hired his own people, mostly young MBAs who'd never written a line of code in their lives. Kids straight out of business school who thought debugging meant fixing a typo in a PowerPoint presentation. I watched these strangers walk through our offices, our sacred space where Rebecca and I had built something from nothing, and they looked at everything like it was broken, like we were broken. He started throwing around buzzwords like pivoting to AI-first solutions and disrupting our own disruption. I'm sitting in engineering meetings in the same conference room where Rebecca used to sketch out our dreams on whiteboards, listening to this guy talk about revolutionizing our platform when he couldn't even explain how our current system worked. My stomach turned every time he opened his mouth. This was Rebecca's legacy he was destroying, one buzzword at a time. But the real red flag, the moment I felt my world shifting under my feet, came during budget cuts in March 2022. A full year before Rebecca died, when she was still fighting for her life in that hospital bed. The company was growing fast, but cash flow was tight. Dan, who was still just a board advisor then, pushed for massive cuts to the R&D budget. "We need to optimize our intellectual property overhead," he said in that boardroom meeting, his voice so casual, so dismissive. Translation: stop paying for patent filings and legal protections. Stop investing in the very thing that made us valuable. I'm sitting there, my hands clenched so tight under the table my knuckles went white, thinking, this guy wants to cut the budget for protecting our innovations, while competitors are breathing down our necks. While Rebecca is dying, and this vulture is already picking apart everything she built. That's when my dad's voice echoed in my head, clear as if he was sitting right next to me. Always have something they can't take away from you. So I made the decision that would save my career and destroy his. But God, it hurt to do it behind Rebecca's back. I had been working on a breakthrough in modular system architecture, a way to make software modules communicate without pre-programmed interfaces. It was revolutionary, complete game changer for the industry. And it was also completely my own work, developed on nights and weekends in my home office, fueled by grief and determination and the desperate need to create something beautiful in a world that was falling apart. I took $40,000 of my own savings, money I'd been saving for a down payment on a house, money that represented years of sacrifice, and filed the patent under my own entity, Redline Systems LLC. 6 months of legal work with my lawyer, Jennifer Park. Every dollar spent felt like a betrayal, but also like survival. She suggested one crucial clause that would change everything. If I was ever terminated from Crystal Valley, all rights would revert to me immediately. I never told Rebecca about this. The guilt ate at me every day she was in the hospital. But I also knew that if the company ever turned on me, if they ever decided I was expendable, I'd have something they couldn't take. Something Rebecca would have wanted me to have. The system I built became the core of everything Crystal Valley did. Every client implementation, every contract, every investor demonstration relied on my patented architecture. But because I had licensed it to the company under what looked like a standard employee agreement, they assumed they owned it. They were wrong. And I was about to prove it. Fast forward to October 2024. The betrayal came on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. I walked into the office. Our office, the place I'd called home for 6 years. Badge in hand, grabbed my usual coffee from the lobby cafe, and headed to my desk on the 15th floor. My keycard didn't work. The sound of that denial beep hit me like a slap. Sarah Chen was waiting for me at reception with that look on her face. You know the one. The "I'm about to ruin your day, but I'm going to pretend it's not personal" look. The same look I'd seen on the HR manager's face when my dad got laid off. "Doris, we need to talk." Walking to that conference room felt like a death march. In that glass box where I'd spent countless hours planning our future, Dan laid it out like he was doing me the biggest favor of my life. The company was pivoting toward AI-integrated solutions, and my traditional architecture approach was no longer scalable for our growth trajectory. Each word felt like a knife: traditional, legacy, obsolete. This was Rebecca's vision he was calling outdated. This was my life's work he was dismissing. But here's what really happened. And if you're still watching, smash that subscribe button because this gets absolutely wild. Dan had convinced the board that he could replace me with 2 junior developers making half my salary. He looked at our 180 million in annual revenue and thought, why are we paying this woman $400,000 a year when we could hire kids for $80,000? What he didn't understand was that I wasn't just an employee. I was the foundation. I was the reason their platform worked at all. I was Rebecca's chosen successor, and he was throwing me away like garbage. "We'll provide excellent references," Dan said, sliding that severance packet across the mahogany table with a smile that made my skin crawl. "And we're prepared to offer you 6 months of salary continuation. 6 months of salary for 6 years of bleeding for this company. 6 months of money for creating the system that generated 180 million in annual revenue. For staying up all night when servers crashed. For missing Christmas dinners to meet impossible deadlines. For holding Rebecca's hand in the hospital while promising her I'd protect what we built." That's when the grief turned to rage. That's when I realized Dan Moore had just made the most expensive mistake in Silicon Valley history. I picked up that packet with hands that were surprisingly steady, looked him dead in the eye, and said those 2 words that would haunt him forever. "Thank you." Then I walked out of that building, past Rebecca's portrait in the lobby, past the conference room where we used to dream, and drove straight to Jennifer Park's office, with tears streaming down my face. Here's my question for you. Drop it in the comments. Have you ever had a moment where someone's greed was so obvious, so cruel, that you knew they were about to destroy themselves? Because Dan Moore had no idea he'd just activated the one clause that would bring down his entire company, and I was about to show him exactly what optimizing intellectual property overhead really meant when you optimize away the wrong person. Jennifer Park's office was in downtown San Jose, in one of those glass towers that looked like it was built to intimidate people. But Jennifer wasn't intimidating. She was precise. And when I showed her my termination papers with trembling hands, still raw from the humiliation, she smiled. Not a cruel smile, a knowing smile. The kind that said justice was about to be served. "They just activated the reversion clause," she said, her voice steady while mine was still shaking. "As of today, you own 100% of patent US 11,234,567 method and system for dynamic modular software architecture." The relief hit me like a tidal wave. For 2 years I'd carried the weight of that secret, the guilt of protecting myself while Rebecca was dying. But sitting in that leather chair looking at Jennifer's confident face, I finally understood. Rebecca would have been proud of me. Here's what Dan didn't know. Every single client implementation of Crystal Valley's platform relied on my patented technology. Every contract they had signed, every demonstration they had given, every promise they had made to investors, all of it depended on architecture that I now owned completely. But I didn't want to just sue them. That would take years, cost millions, and probably end with some settlement where lawyers got rich and I got a fraction of what I deserved. That wasn't justice. That was just business. I wanted something better. I wanted them to feel what I felt sitting in that conference room. I wanted them to understand what it meant to have everything you built ripped away from you. I wanted justice for Rebecca, so I waited. For exactly 48 hours, I did nothing but grieve. For my career, for Rebecca's legacy, for the naive belief that loyalty mattered in corporate America. I let Dan have his victory lap. I let him tell the board how much money he was saving by eliminating redundant overhead. I let him start planning his next round of cost cuts, probably already targeting other people who'd given their lives to this company. On Thursday morning, with hands that were surprisingly steady, I sent a single email to Crystal Valley's legal department, effective immediately. Patent US 11,234,567, B2 license is terminated per Section 7.3a of the original agreement. All implementations must cease within 24 hours or will constitute willful infringement. License renewal available through Redline Systems, LLC. Then I sat back in my home office, surrounded by 6 years of late-night work, empty coffee cups, and photos of better times, and waited for the fireworks. The call came at 11:47 a.m. Marcus Webb from legal, voice shaking like a leaf. "Doris, we need to talk. There's been some kind of mistake with the licensing system." There was no mistake. At exactly midnight, my patent protection had kicked in. Every client trying to use Crystal Valley's platform got the same message. License authorization expired. Contact system administrator. But here's the beautiful, poetic justice of it all. Dan had fired me. So there was no system administrator. Within hours, their biggest clients were calling, screaming, threatening lawsuits. Morrison Financial couldn't process payroll for 30,000 employees. TechFlow Industries couldn't access their inventory systems during their busiest quarter. Meridian Healthcare couldn't pull patient records in the middle of flu season. $180 million in annual revenue. Dead in the water. Rebecca's life's work, held hostage by the man who destroyed it. I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Power. Dan called me directly at 2:15 p.m. I stared at his name on my phone screen. The same phone where I used to get his dismissive emails about optimizing resources, and let it go to voicemail. Then I listened to him stumble through an explanation about technical difficulties and how they'd have everything sorted out by end of business. His voice was cracking. The arrogant MBA was finally afraid. He called again at 4:30 p.m. This time I answered, my voice calm as still water. "Doris, thank God. We're having some kind of system failure. All our client implementations are down. We need you to." "I'm sorry," I said, savoring every word. "I don't work for Crystal Valley anymore, remember?" The silence on that call was worth 6 years of underappreciation. Worth every sleepless night. Worth every missed family dinner. Worth watching Rebecca's dream die in that conference room. By Friday morning, Crystal Valley's stock had dropped 34%. Dan was in full panic mode, calling emergency board meetings and promising investors that the temporary technical issues would be resolved immediately. I watched the news coverage from my living room, tears streaming down my face, not from sadness, but from vindication. This was for Rebecca. This was for every engineer who'd ever been called redundant overhead. That's when I got the call I'd been waiting for. "Doris, this is Michael Chen, CEO of Ardent Dynamics. I think we should talk." My heart raced. Ardent Dynamics was Crystal Valley's biggest competitor. They'd been trying to break into the modular systems market for 3 years but could never match our technology. Now they understood why. Michael and I met at a coffee shop in Menlo Park, the same cafe where Rebecca and I used to brainstorm solutions on Saturday mornings. He was direct, respectful, everything Dan wasn't. "I want to license your patent. Name your price." I took a deep breath, feeling Rebecca's spirit beside me. "It's not for license," I said. "It's for sale. $1.1 billion, cash, and I come with it as chief advisory architect." Michael didn't even blink. Done. My hands shook as I signed those papers 3 hours later. By Monday morning, Ardent Dynamics owned the technology that had built Crystal Valley. And Crystal Valley owned nothing but a bunch of useless code that couldn't run without my architecture. Dan Moore resigned on Tuesday. I watched the announcement online, remembering his smug face in that conference room. The board brought in a crisis management firm on Wednesday. By Friday, they were talking bankruptcy. I never felt angry. I never felt vindictive. I felt something better, something deeper. I felt free. 6 years of building something beautiful for people who saw me as overhead. 6 years of loyalty to a company that discarded me the moment it was convenient. 6 years of believing that hard work and dedication mattered more than politics and cost-cutting. But in the end, I learned the most valuable lesson of my career. True power isn't working for someone else's dream. True power is owning something they can't take away. True power is knowing your worth, even when everyone around you forgets it. Dan Moore thought he was firing dead weight. Instead, he was cutting the rope that held his entire company together. And me? I went from a discarded employee to the architect of the biggest corporate collapse in Silicon Valley that year. I went from grieving Rebecca's legacy to protecting it forever. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad. Sometimes the best revenge is just saying thank you and walking away with everything they thought belonged to them. If this story taught you anything about protecting your work and knowing your worth, hit that subscribe button right now. Because there are more stories like this one. Stories about people who refused to let corporate greed win, who turned their pain into power, who proved that loyalty should never be one-sided. And here's my final question for you. What's the one thing you've created at work that you wish you could take with you if they ever let you go? Drop it in the comments, because you might be surprised how much power you actually have. Remember, they can fire you, but they can't fire what you own. And sometimes, what you own is worth more than everything they think they have.